Friends, Namaste. I am Rajnish Savant and you are watching Janta Janardhan. Friends, you have just saw my earlier video that was part 1 of the topic Global Economic Status vis-a-vis Covid-19 pandemic. That video was focused on the impact factor. Friends, in this second part, I will be focusing on revival measures that need to be taken and some positives out of this crisis. I will start this video by mentioning how the Reserve Bank is contributing to the revival of Indian economy. Reserve Bank of India is closely working along with the government on saving companies from COVID-induced death. It has mandated loan moratoria, injected enormous liquidity into financial system, and joined hands with the center to guarantee a wide range of loans. A special mention here about Jeremy Stein, a Harvard University, who has proposed an appealing solution in a Princeton webinar. In most recessions, the central bank acts as a lender of last resort, flooding the financial system with money to revive companies suffering from illiquidity as distinct from insolvency. But in a mega recession, such as the 2008 called the Great Recession, a lender of last resort may not be enough. We may also need venture capitalists of last resort with enough patience and deep pockets to inject massive amounts of equity into corporate giants too big to be saved by ordinary VC firms. The US government played this role in 2008 under the Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP. President Barack Obama, in effect, nationalized many of the biggest US companies through an injection of fresh equity and allotment of warrants at ultra low prices. The companies taken over included two biggest commercial banks, Citibank and Bank of America, two of the three top auto companies, General Motors and Chrysler, and the biggest insurance company, AIG, American International Group. The two big mortgage underwriters, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, were also taken over and resold. In all, the US Treasury made 780 equity investments, of which 637 ended in profit and 138 in losses, for a net profit exceeding $50 billion. Hopefully, India will not suffer the collapse of so many corporate giants, but a mega recession will surely sink some giants and thousands of smaller companies. Banks cannot be told to keep rescuing these companies with loans that cannot be repaid. That will kill banks. The right route will be a TARP-like program where GOI nationalizes fallen giants at a low price, nurses them through crisis, and then reprivatizes them at a profit. This will exemplify Jeremy Stein's idea of the government as VC of the last resort. We have witnessed in recent times that some private sector banks went bust and were merged with larger public sector banks. Yes Bank has been kept alive through equity infusion by not just State Bank of India but also 7 other PSBs, creating a unique shareholding pattern for a new independent management. It is said that the US government does not believe in taking over private sector giants, and hence there was never any doubt about reprivatization. But in India, if the government acts as a VC of last sort to stem mass bankruptcies, how does one ensure that this does not become an excuse for permanent nationalization? The World Bank has halted the release of the Doing Business report after discrepancies were reported in the changes to data published in 2017 and 2019. A statement said that the World Bank will act based on the findings of the probe and retrospectively correct the data of countries that were most affected by irregularities. China, along with three other countries, Azerbaijan, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, appeared to have been inappropriately altered their data, a WSJ report said. World Bank has asked its independent internal auditors to probe processes for data collection and review the report to maintain data integrity, it said. Bank will act based on the findings of the probe and retrospectively correct the data of countries that were most affected by irregularities. India was among the countries which witnessed the most notable improvement. As per the Doing Business 2020 report released in October 2019, with 63rd rank in the case in the ease of doing business. Friends, Rural Economic Times said rural focused lenders a big play for India's revival story. The rural economic recovery is being seen by experts as a major driver for India's revival in coming months. Though financial institutions specializing in rural lending saw a complete standstill during April May, they are now steadily moving along the path of recovery after initial shock of the COVID induced nationwide lockdown. In June July, rural play fintech companies saw green shoots aided by the government financial inclusion push, subsidies, and early reopening of agriculture economy and good monsoon. A record number of digital payments have been reported on channels operated by the National Payments Corporation of India, aided by the withdrawal of government relief funds from the Jan Dhan accounts of beneficiaries. There is a larger opportunity in untapped potential of rural India as urban centers have reached a level of saturation. As the rural economy gets more and more connected with the digital push due to integration, more e-commerce, banking and business, it will have more weight in India's economic revival compared to before. The future seems to be bright. As the pandemic cripples urban centers, India will have to rely on its farm economy to provide relief to millions. Bharat or rural India appears to be smiling, aided by bountiful rains, bumper harvests, and government schemes. Some luck with monsoon this year and continued government support will be a shot in the arm of the farmers and India as a whole. Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD policy responses. Let us see what it says. The OECD, the COVID-19 crisis is accelerating the use and diffusion of digital tools. Confinement measures are fomenting remote working practices, remote learning, and e-services. This is particularly important in rural areas where distances and commuting times tend to be longer. All this could promote attractiveness to rural areas. With changing habits and greater willingness to embrace digital tools, government and private operators might increase investments to realize their potential benefits. In rural areas, the increased connectivity of services can further unlock opportunities of work, synergies, and regional integration between rural areas and their surrounding. Therefore, the COVID-19 outbreak may incentivize the growth of new firms and jobs that offer digital solutions and connect cities and rural areas in a more integrated way. Due to the high concentration of jobs in large urban areas, the use of remote distributed networks could increase the linkages between rural and urban areas. This concept also reflects the ongoing shift in working methods. From traditional office-based workers to more flexible methods, including working at home options, working in different and multiple time zones, and nomadic workers, that is, remote workers traveling around different locations. Another opportunity could be related to changes in social and policy preferences towards service of proximity, greater local consumption, and recovery of strategic industries. There may be shift in buying habits to favor local goods and tourism sites, as well as production from small local businesses and primary producers. For example, in terms of tourism, overcrowded destination might see high reduction in tourism flows, while the smaller rural destinations may become popular. The Veneto region, Italy, for example, wants to leverage lesser known UNESCO heritage sites to shift volumes from Venice to different attractions as part of its recovery plan. In some OECD countries, discussions about reshoring and repatriation of strategic industries that were once delocalized can reactivate rural economies as host of those industries. These changes could also favor transition towards a zero carbon economy. The positive effect of lockdown measures on pollution and CO2 emission levels can lead to increased social demands for policies to support green and sustainable growth. The recovery process should accelerate the transition of a zero carbon economy by offering sustainable development paths for rural communities, especially those relying on extractive economic activities. Indeed, rural areas are crucial for environmental and energy transition in at least two ways. First, rural economic sectors such as agriculture, mining, and forestry are important emitters of greenhouse gases. Reducing emissions in these sectors to avoid the worst impact of climate change and safeguard biodiversity while remaining economically viable will be a key priority in coming years. Second, rural areas comprise a vast majority of land, water, and natural resources which are fundamental to absorbing CO2, providing ecosystem services, and safeguarding biodiversity. Further, supporting countries in developing paths for climate conscious rural economic development will be key to recovery of COVID-19. Finally, this crisis offers rural communities an opportunity to mobilize and strengthen their local networks and cooperative structures to face the economic shock. Rural areas tend to benefit from tight community networks able to self-organize to adapt to structural changes. Local initiatives that emerged temporarily to address the immediate economic and social effects of pandemic, that is community fleets transporting medical workers and elderly population, can be useful mechanisms to promote well-being and cohesion in rural communities in a long term. The National Herald says, former Prime Minister of India, Dr. Manmohan Singh's advice to the current Prime Minister Narendra Modi on ways to come out from current economic crisis. The article says, the bunch of measures in the last few years has in effect tried to touch a hitherto untouched segment of Indian economy, that is, the informal sector. The presumption was that the informal sector should be brought within the purview of the formal sector and thereby should be under the tax net, though maybe not paying taxes. This meant they should be monitored. The informal sector of the economy was the quintessential entrepreneurship of the people. In the numerous small and tiny units, individual entrepreneurs specialized in doing small little things in the manner of assembly line functioning of large factories. They do not come under the tax obligation because neither their earnings nor their turnover qualifies for the tax threshold. But for that matter, they are not illegal or their earnings are not black money. Introduction of GST discriminated against these cottage units because larger buyers in the supply chain preferred those having GST registration or tax returns. These units in their aggregate who prop up employment and create the basic purchasing power It is their employees who would go for a rupee 5 biscuit package. Along with the introduction of GST, the demonetization done earlier had hurt their cash flows. Digitization was good for the big and organized, but not for these tiny units. The government has to somehow help unwind the wires which had tied up the operations of the small and tiny units. Cash flow must start for these smaller informal units and they should regain their normal old rhythm of functioning. We should recognize that the informal small sector is the primary cushion of Indian economy. Their real contribution is difficult to measure and only vaguely sought to be estimated into the GDP calculation. But these amorphous, unorganized, individual based economic units are the basic building blocks of Indian economy. Do not try to formalize them or seek taxes from these units. Give them boost and we will bounce back. India must take 3 steps immediately to stem the damage of coronavirus pandemic, according to its former PM, Dr. Manmohan Singh. Dr. Singh, who is widely regarded as the architect of India's economic reforms program. First, the government should ensure people's livelihood are protected and they have spending power through a significant direct cash assistance. Second, it should make adequate capital available for businesses through government-backed credit guarantee programs. Third, it should fix the financial sector through institutional autonomy and processes. With tax receipts plummeting, economists have debated about how a cash-strapped government could be able to get the money to fund direct transfers and provide more capital to ailing banks and credit to businesses. The answer, said Dr. Singh, was borrowing. Higher borrowing is inevitable, he said. Even if we have to spend an additional of 10% of the GDP to cater to the military, health and economic challenges, it must be done. He acknowledged that it would increase India's debt to GDP ratio, but if borrowing can save lives, borders, restore livelihoods and boost economic growth, then it's worth it, he said. We must not be shy of borrowing, but we must be prudent on how we use that borrowing, he said. India is much more integrated with the rest of the world now, Dr. Singh said. Hence, what happens in the global economy will have a significant significant impact on India's economy. In this pandemic, the global economy is severely dented, and that will be a big cause of concern for India, he said. Friends, I went through an article in America's Quarterly by Mauricio Cardenas. I hope I have pronounced the name properly. If not, kindly pardon me. This particular article gave me a personal boost, and it was quite a spirit lifting article. The line, "You never want a serious crisis to go waste," long before Ram Emanuel, Barack Obama's one-time chief of staff, used this expression to refer to the global financial crisis of 2008-2009. Winston Churchill had already made it famous in the wake of the Second World War. We can try to look ahead at what positives might ultimately come out of the human and economic tragedy the world is facing. Following is a collective list of 10 ways our societies might improve after the pandemic based on a virtual dialogue with followers on social media who contributed ideas and suggestions. First 5. 1. Financial inclusion with the help of fintech has increased. Greater investment in hospitals after the pandemic is over. There will be more hospital beds that was below global standards earlier. Greater use of information and communication technology ICT, and digitalization. Investments in ICTs are urgently needed as it will help revive the economy and even contribute to the environment by reducing transportation needs. That is why digital connectivity was highlighted among flagship COVID-19 recovery programs in a study led by Nicholas Stern and Joseph Stiglitz, published by the University of Oxford. Fourth, more awareness about the effects of crisis foretold or white swans such as climate change. Increased concern for our health and that of the planet may lead to decisions that actually combat climate change. Aversion of unnecessary travel and meetings. Video conferencing technology is now a much more acceptable and friendly substitute. A reduction of CO2 and other polluting, the last five gains the pandemic brought to us. A. 1. A reduction of CO2 and other polluting emissions. Second, a reduction in crime and road accidents. Third, less use of paper. Aboard Acrobat reported that use of PDP documents increased by 50% during pandemic. Fourth, increased punctuality. Fifth, finally, the greatest gain, enhanced family life. It is still too early to determine the pandemic's lasting effects, but the bottom line is that crises allow us to make decisions and implement policies that are difficult in normal times. The biggest mistake could be to not take advantage of this situation to resolve issues that will impact our future, such as a sharp deterioration of the fiscal scenario. Cardenas says that while we are at it, we can add a touch of optimism to these complex and difficult times. Friends, I always believe crises have always been the best teachers. The world needs to act as one big family. The human relations and values are being put to test on a daily basis. The developed economies need to act as father figures of the family and lift the emerging markets and the developing economies. There is no doubt that together we can and we will change things to come. Friends, the need of the hour is that we need to strongly spread the message of oneness and moral support along with economic support. Friends, with this hope of light, I end this video here. I will keep interacting with you all lovely people across the globe. This is Rajneesh Sawant signing off. Namaste.